Hello everyone and welcome to this technical presentation of Gravitee. I'm Linus Håkansson and I head up the solutions engineering here at Gravitee. So in this presentation and demonstration, we will start with an introduction to the architecture of the Gravitee platform. We'll then go into the platform overview to see what components are part of the existing offering for Gravitee. We'll dive into each of the components. So we'll have a look at the API designer. How can we create an API from scratch using drag and drop functionality? We'll dive into the API management piece and go through how we import and create new APIs to manage, how we configure different plans so people can access our APIs. We'll have a look at how we can expose the documentation and the plan subscriptions through a developer portal. And then we'll go through our design studio to see how we can protect our APIs through different policies and traffic shaping means. And then finally, we'll use the gateway to actually call our API to go through a full demonstration of what that looks like. We'll also have a look at the alert engine, which allows us to set up a notification. I'm going to be using Slack as the means of a channel there for one of our SLA notifications. And then we'll go through access management to see how we can take what we've built, but create an OAuth 2 application on top of our API to enable that kind of additional security. We'll enable Google as an identity provider for the sign-in for users that wants to authenticate with our API. And I will embed this whole experience in a web page to kind of illustrate how that can look like from a consumer and user perspective. And we'll obviously connect our access management application with our API that we created previously. And then finally, we have a look at the cockpit solution that lets us get a single pane of glass of all the components in Gravitee. And we'll look at how we can install a new, or register rather, a new installation of our access management piece, and how we can have a multiple environment set up with that. So let's start by going through the architecture of the Gravitee platform. So in here on this slide, I have two different kind of deployment models. I have the Gravitee SaaS, so where we host everything on top of the firewall here in the diagram. And then we have the firewall, and within that firewall, for example, your customer network. So let's take the example of where you would like to deploy the full Gravitee solution within your network, whether that's within your favorite cloud provider or whether that is within your on-premise data center. Worth mentioning is that each Gravitee component can be deployed, as a Docker container. We have a lot of Kubernetes Helm chart. We have Docker Compose instructions. You can run it on Windows, on Linux, using traditional installations and RPM packages, etc., etc. So if we take the example here of deploying everything within the customer network. Now, imagine you have some backend services that you would like to expose through an API gateway. It might be a Kafka topic, it might be a RESTful API or a SOAP service. Now, typically you want to have the gateway or the gateways as close to those data sources as possible from a security and from a latency perspective. So imagine you deploy a set of Gravitee gateways, and Gravitee gateways can be deployed to multiple locations. Maybe you want to deploy some to your partner network, some to your own physical data center, and maybe one set to the cloud. You can then manage all of those gateways and all APIs from within a single console. So in this scenario, let's say that you deploy the Gravitee consoles and the management interfaces, as well as the metadata also within your network. So the consoles and the management is basically for a developer portal for people to discover your APIs. It's also for administration to define what an API should look like, what the backend it should proxy, the traffic shaping that goes with it, and all the analytics. Now, all the metadata and analytics information sit in a metadata component. By default, Gravitee uses MongoDB and Elasticsearch to provide that. However, we have a very pluggable solution. That means that you can bring any type of data set to have as your repository. For example, through JDBC, you can have a MySQL database to store all your metadata and information that is used by the Gravitee backend to update and read information. So the relationship between those components and the gateways that actually run your APIs is that the gateways will basically make a call to the metadata layer to extract the information it needs in order to execute and run the API. So that is, what backend service am I proxying? What are the different traffic shaping policies? All that information is stored in memory within the gateway, and it reads that information from the metadata component, whether that is MongoDB or SQL Server or something like this. Now, if you take a look at the SaaS models, imagine that you don't have anything on premise, or you're fine with having accessible components in the cloud. And then you can, of course, use our completely hosted offering where we deploy the gateways in our cloud in a Gravitee SaaS solution. And then we also host the interfaces, the developer portal, the console, the repositories. We host all the components in our cloud. Now, obviously, that means that you would still be able to deploy gateways if you want to on-premise too. So maybe you would want to have some gateways deployed in the cloud as a SaaS offering, but you also want to have some gateways deployed to your on-premise. But in this case, maybe you don't want to deploy the full Gravitee solution there. You're fine with Gravitee hosting the user interfaces and the repositories. So that's also a model. You can have one user interface with Gravitee and manage multiple gateways and deploy APIs to different gateways through a concept called sharding tags. Now, obviously, gateways can call backend services both from on-prem to the cloud or from the cloud to on-prem based on a VPN connection or how you kind of configure your network and how your security team is looking at kind of cross-network communication. There is a central component that allows you to control and manage and monitor all your Gravitee installations, which we will go through later on in this demonstration, which is called a cockpit. So the cockpit is either a SaaS solution or something that can also be deployed, for example, within your firewall that lets you and your DevOps team manage and monitor all your Gravitee installations. The Gravitee API ecosystem basically consists of 5 components. So on the bottom left, we have the API Designer. So the API Designer is a quite unique tool that lets both technical and non-technical users define and design the structure of the APIs. So if you're aware of concepts like OpenAPI or Swagger definitions that traditionally have been created using quite technical approaches using JSON or YAML definitions, our API Designer lets those users, both technical, speed up the creation and remove the errors in those specifications, but also for non-technical users to have a drag and drop and very visual approach to defining, for example, for product owners, what the API should look like and how it should respond. Then those definitions can be imported into our API management solution. So our API management component basically consists of 3 main things. So the first one is our console. So that lets organizations manage the entire lifecycle of APIs and applications. So you can import APIs, you can provide different types of policies on top of those APIs to control, how many times a consumer can call the API per minute, what IP addresses we can call it from, different types of transformation policies, maybe to automatically convert the response from XML to JSON to the consumer. And then we have a developer portal to where you can publish those APIs, and both anonymous and authenticated users can come in and view and discover APIs and see the documentation, even try the APIs out, and then potentially subscribe to the APIs using various means of authentication, maybe API keys, OAuth 2 plans, etc., etc. Now, a central component, of course, to the API management layer is the API gateway. So the API gateway is a very performant kind of Java-based engine that lets you deploy and proxy your backend services so that they can have a layer of authentication and traffic shaping on top of that. The alert engine is an additional tool that allows organizations to set up custom reports and SLA structures. So for example, if you have an API that you're proxying for a backend service, and you really need to make sure that if one of your consumers are having a response time that is twice as high as normal or twice as high as the response time of the backend API, for instance, you want to create maybe a Slack notification or send out an email to one of your operations groups, for instance. The alert engine is also used to provide out-of-the-box alerts for things like your health of your infrastructure components. When there's a problem there, you want to be notified, or for example, using our access management component, you have users that have too many failed, sign-in attempts, or they have reset their passwords too many times. That's also a concept of where the alert engine can, send out notifications. So the access management component is a component that basically provides a more secure layer on top of your APIs. So we can, federate access across multiple identity providers, such as, OpenID Connect supported providers, Azure AD, Google, Facebook, all the other types of social accounts. And what you can do is you can basically allow your developers and third parties to build very rich experiences that uses these secure sign-in processes to protect your APIs, such as OAuth 2. And we have biometric support, so you can use facial recognition and fingerprint to have the users authenticating to the APIs before those tokens are used to access the APIs within our API management platform. And then finally, we have the cockpit. So the cockpit is basically a control plane that allows you to have a central view and central kind of user interface to monitor all the installations within your Gravitee API ecosystem, as well as any alerts or monitoring information and global organizational settings that you can provide in this cockpit interface. So let's start by defining an API and API designer. We'll then have a look to see how we can control the access to that API and manage the entire lifecycle of it. And then we'll also play around with Alert Engine and access management to see how we can provide an additional level of security on top of API when building a rich mobile or web application. And then also through the Alert Engine, we'll see how we can set up some type of automated SLA breach notifications, and then we'll see how it all plays together using the cockpit and see how we monitor the whole installation and deployment of it. So my use case is that I'm a company that provides information about vacations and trips that we have to offer. So a trip for our vacation can, for example, be a cruise trip in the islands of Greece, for instance, and it will have destinations, multiple islands potentially. It will have maybe an offer and whether or not this trip has already been sold out. So as a product owner, I might want to come in here in the API designer tool and define what that should look like. Then I will basically hand that specification, the technical specification, to my developers to have them implement the actual backend service to provide this information. And then obviously I want, as an API manager, to come in and proxy that service and provide authentication and some type of traffic shaping to ensure that it is up to the quality that my business requires. So using the API designer, I can either go and actually import existing specifications if I already have something based on JSON, Swagger definitions, or actually FreeMind templates as well, to see if I can start on something that has already been initiated by someone else, or I can use an actual example model here for products or shops that comes with the Gravitee API designer product. Currently, we do not have any models here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create one from scratch. I'm going to call this one vacations. All right, so now we have this kind of standard ID and simple attribute here just to get started and provide some guidelines in terms of how we use this tool to create our definition. What you will see here is that we basically have three main views of this API designer tool. On the left, we have the attribute editor. So whenever I click here in the central piece on something, it's going to refresh the UI here on the left that specifically controls how this highlighted component should be set. On the right-hand side, we have the in real-time generated Swagger or OpenAPI specification documentation that has been generated based on the left component's settings and the structure of the API that we defined right here in the central piece. So our main entry point is going to be /vacations. And by default, it's going to have an ID, and it's also going to have a few other attributes that we are going to create. Now, what I can start doing is I can just specify what type of operations I want consumers to be allowed to take on this. Should they be able, for example, to search through a specific vacation in our database? Should they be able to create new vacations? Should they be able to read all of the vacations that we have available? Should they be able to update them? Should they be able to delete them? Now, in my case, I'm actually going to provide this to my consumers. I don't want them to go and update or delete anything. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove and uncheck rather those two operations. Now, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have one search operation that enables us to return all the vacations back to the user. And then I'm going to have read operations. Well, actually, I'm not going to have a create either. So let's go and remove that one. So we just have these two simple operations. One to retrieve all vacations and one to retrieve just a specific vacation identified by its ID. Okay, let's start by changing the default here for this attribute. So I'm going to give this the label name here. So this is the define our vacation by its name. So an example of that could be, for instance, Greece Island Cruise or something like this. So the name of the type, the name of the actual cruise or vacation, something like this. Okay, now I'm going to add a new one. So just come here to vacations. I'm going to say I want a new one. I'm going to call this one type. So this will define what type of vacation it is. So in our case, it's going to be a cruise type of vacation. So I'm going to say the type of vacation, it could be, flight, it could be a cruise, it could be anything. All right, then next what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify destinations. So as I'm entering plural here, you might give the idea that I might have multiple destinations for my vacation. It might be, in this case, when I'm going on my cruise in Greece, it might be several islands. So I might say here, list of all the destinations for the vacation. And an example here, let's actually not provide an example because we're going to have, child objects of this, because I'm going to make this into, not a text, I'm going to make this into a list of destinations. So for each of a destination in my destinations list, it's going to have a city. So let's say, for example, I'm going to say the city of the destination. And as an example here, I'm going to say, for example, Corfu. So let's say one of those islands that I'm intending to have there. And it might also have, it might be multiple countries, right, that I'm going to be running my cruise on. So let's call this one country. And for description, the country of the destination. And then an example here, I'm going to say Greece. Okay, then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have also an offer, because I want to be able to provide some kind of commercial information about this vacation as well to my third parties and through my consumers. So I'm going to say the info about the existing offer for the vacation. And here I'm gonna just leave that by default. I'm gonna have to create two sub attributes here. So I'm gonna have one that I'm gonna call discount, which is gonna be a, let's put it as a number. So that might be, for example, 0.25%, or 25% rather. So let's say the discount available, something like this. All right. And then for the second parameter here, I'm going to say that this is the description. So it might be, a limited, description of the offer. I'm going to say an example, limited only until end of year or something like this. All right, just finally, I'm going to have just one property here that I'm going to call sold out, which is going to be of the type Boolean. So it's either sold out this vacation or it's not, right? So an example could be true, yes, it is sold out. So if vacation is sold out or not. Now we could go and build this much more complicated. We could have multiple kind of sub paths within our API, but for now we're just going to leave this quite simple. Now, as I mentioned, in real time, we're building up this documentation based on OpenAPI specification here. So I can see what would it look like if someone goes and call the get operation or the read operation to read all the vacations that I have. So here we can see what an example response would look like based on this definition. So the ID, the name, the type, the destinations array here, and the offer, all you can see here with the descriptions, or rather examples that I provided in the definition. Now, I can also go and specify a specific vacation, right? So if I put in the ID after my vacations resource, I will then get just information about a single vacation. And obviously, if I would support create and update operations, then we would provide examples of what you need to feed in to this particular API in order to create a new vacation. I can also see the schemas here that defines, also has the descriptions and examples of my properties. Okay, so I'm quite happy with this. This is a good starting point. So now as a next step, I obviously want to export this to my developers so they can actually use this as a template to implement the backend service that provides this information. So what I'll do is I'll go here to dashboard, and I'll have a few options here for my API. I can download this as a YAML or JSON specification, or I can deploy it directly to the API manager. So let's go and do that and see what that looks like within the API manager component. Okay, so we can see here in our API management console that we have a list of APIs here, and one of them is called Vacations API. This red little icon means that it's not running as of now, because obviously we just imported it. So the API management component, as we mentioned, consists of three components. It has the console, which we're currently in right now. This is where me as an administrator, I can come in, I can view my APIs, I can manage APIs, I can create new APIs, I can deploy them, and manage the entire life cycle. And then we have the gateway and the portal, which we'll be examining in a few moments. So I already have a few APIs here set up in my environment, but obviously the new one that was just imported here is the Vacations API. Now, what I could have done is I could have gone and created a new API, right? And I could have said, I want to create an API from scratch by defining, the backend, maybe import some documentation for it. Or I could go and create an API by importing a Swagger or OpenAPI descriptor file like a JSON or YAML one, or I can actually go and import a WSDL file to have Gravitee creating an API proxy on top of a SOAP API, for instance. But in our case, obviously what we did is we went through the API designer and deployed the API from within there. So let's go ahead and explore what this looks like. So it has a default description that is configurable from the API designer. We're not going to touch that for now. Here in the portal component, this is all the settings that are relevant for how this API will be consumed and visible in our developer portal. So we're going to come back to this. One thing I wanted to show is the proxy. So proxy is basically the back-end service that this API is proxying. Now, in our case, we have to imagine that our team has already now implemented the vacation back-end service. So if I go here to endpoints, we have actually that one already imported our backend server URL that is actually serving the Vacations API. And the reason why this one is there by default is because we have that backend set up in our API designer component as the default server for our APIs. So we don't have to go and change anything there, but this is effectively the backend service that we will be proxying to when we call this API right here on the gateway. Okay, so going back to the portal, there's a couple of things we need to do before people can go and consume this API. We obviously need to start the API to actually have it being deployed to our API gateways. And then we also need to publish the API to our developer portal. Now, before someone can go and consume this API in our developer portal, we need to create one or more plans. So a plan in Gravitee is effectively the contract between a consumer and the actual API itself. So a plan could be, for example, a free anonymous plan that allows anyone on the internet to subscribe and call the API. It could be a locked down plan, maybe using an API key that is managed for each of your customers, or it could be something like an OAuth 2 based plan that allows maybe people to sign in using a mobile application using their credentials in Azure Active Directory to get access and call the API. We're going to start by creating an anonymous plan. So I'm going to say here that I'm called this one free, open for all as the description. I'm not going to have any conditions or subscription type of settings because this authentication type will be set to keyless. Okay, so what I'm going to do though is for anyone using this plan specifically when calling to the API, i.e. not having an authentication, so anyone not making any authentication to this API, they will be enforced by a rate limiting. So I'm going to say here that, okay, anyone that uses this API without any authentication, they can mostly do 5 requests per minute. Okay, so let's start with just using this plan, and then we'll kind of add some other plans as we go along to see what the different types of user experiences we can have. So we've published this plan as we've kind of went through before. We published in API, we started the API. The last thing we want to do before we actually go and experience this API as a consumer is we want to go into the documentation section here. So as we obviously imported this from our API designer, we expect to find the kind of entire Swagger definition right here for us already configured. One thing we want to do though is we just want to go into the configuration here, and I'm going to enable the try it mode so that people can actually try out and experience the API from within the environment in the developer portal. So I'm going to save that. And then finally, I'm going to go and just go into my documentation here and publish this documentation to the developer portal. Now, coming back to our generic details here for the portal over API, we could obviously make this public, meaning that no one needs to actually sign in to our developer portal to consume it, which kind of makes sense because we have an anonymous plan anyway with a rate limiting. But just to demonstrate, what I want to do is I want to assign a specific user to get access to discover and use this API. So rather than myself as the primary owner, I'm also going to add another user here. So I'm going to type in Alice. Now, Alice actually sits within my external identity system. And we're going to come on to that in a separate video, but for now, I'm just going to add her with the user role here to my API. Okay, so next thing, what I want to do is I want to open up my developer portal. So this is the developer portal I've configured. I've just done some branding of the portal. What I want to do is I want to see if I can see anything here. So I can just go to the catalog. Now, we don't have any APIs that are actually public. So I need to sign in to see any type of APIs. So what I'll do is I press the sign in button here, and I can use a lot of different types of authentication. We can hook up with Azure Active Directory, we can hook up with Google Single Sign-On, or in this case, I'm going to use the SnapLogic Access Management as a kind of a teaser. Now, that access management can then federate to multiple identity providers. I think we have more than 17 or so identity providers that we support. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be clicking this SnapLogic AM button. Then I'm going to select that I actually want to sign in with fingerprint device or security key. And here I'm going to type in my username, which is Alice. And now it basically prompts me here to sign in with my Mac Touch ID. So we do support a lot of different types of biometric sign-in means, and the users could sit basically in whatever identity provider that is available. Now I'm signed in as Alice, so if I come in here to the catalog, I expect obviously to find my vacations API available to me. So I can come in here, I can obviously view the documentation, and here on this documentation, I can see our vacations resource. So obviously in our case, we only enabled the search and find information. So we have the vacations to get all vacations, and we have the one to get a specific one based on ID. So as we mentioned, we enabled the try it mode on our documentation configuration. So if I just click that try it, I can just put in let's say 10 as the ID of the vacation, and then I'll just hit the execute button. Now we got a response back here from our API. Again, it has the example mock responses, right? With our discounts and our names. Obviously, we didn't put any destinations in there, but the the type of vacation, etc. And it's actually calling the gateway here to get that mock response. But in order for me to actually start using this API, I might in some cases need to subscribe to it. Now, in our case, in this scenario, obviously we had anonymous plan, so basically anyone can use it. So I would just be able to go and copy that URL. So let me just go and do that. I can just copy it from here, for instance. Oops, and I can then go and let's try to just paste it in our browser to see what happens. Now we get that response. This is coming from the mock generated by our implementation. Now let's go and hit this a couple of times. So I'm going to make 5 calls here, and eventually it's going to say, rate limit exceeded, you reach a limit of 5 requests per minute. And that's because on this plan, we put that limitation that if you use this anonymous plan, you're going to have to wait a bit when you've used the API 5 times. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create another type of plan, a plan that allows you to use the API as much as you want. However, you need to first get kind of approved and have your application being subscribed to the API. So let's come back. Let's sign in as my admin user here. So let's just go into my cockpit. We're going to come into that later. And now I'm signed in as my admin here again to my console. Let's just switch the environment here to my dev environment and into my APIs. So for my vacations API, I want to go into plans, and now I want to create a new plan. So I'm going to call this one, let's call this one protected. If say unlimited access, let's just unlimited access to the API. However, we need to subscribe to this plan. So you could set this to automatically validate anyone that subscribes to it, but I'm going to leave that off for now. And instead, I'm going to set the authentication type to API key. So now it means that in order to call this plan, you need to pass an API key by default in the header. So we're not going to apply any restrictions on this. However, we could actually, so let's go and publish this plan. We could say that we actually want to add some more traffic shaping to our API requests and responses. So the design part of your API allows you to put any type of security or transformation policies and apply them to either the request phase, so basically before the request reaches your backend service and your proxy endpoint, or you can have it apply to the response flow, which means that we apply the transformation or the additional policy after we have received the response from the backend service, but before we give it back to the consumer that called the API. So an example here we have already created for us a set of flows for our protected plan and our free plan. So obviously our free plan contains this rate limit policy configured for the plan, and our protected plan do not contain anything at all. Obviously it has an API key type based authentication on it. For the actual resources on API, so we have two API resources. We have vacations and we have vacations ID. We can actually go and apply specific policies on a very fine-grained level. So we can actually go and apply policies on, when you make a GET request to vacations, or when you make a GET request to vacations with an ID. Now, as we imported this from a Swagger specification through our API designer tool, automatically we are applying mock policies. So a mock policy is basically, in this case, looking at the Swagger example that we provided in the designer, and it's applying that in this mock policy as the response, which means that the API call is not actually going to the backend service. Instead, it's returning whatever is put here in the mock response, which is automatically what we have based on the Swagger that we're using. So for us to actually reach the backend service, I would need to go and disable or delete these policies. So let's go and do that for both of my resources right here. So I'm going to go and delete the mock responses that are returned by default. Now, let's say for some reason that for when I call vacations with ID, I can only do that from certain IP ranges, because maybe that's a sensitive operation. Maybe it doesn't make sense in this case, but it could have been maybe a put operation where you want to have that only being allowed from a certain region or from a certain data center, maybe within your organization. So I'm going to say you need to be from, for example, this type of IP address, which is obviously not an IP address that I'm going to be on, but let's put that in. I'm going to save that IP filtering policy. Now, we have more than 40 policies here. Some of them are around security, such as a key, a certificate, filtering on IP addresses. We have transformation type of policies, such as transforming the headers or the query parameters or the entire body, either before the request reaches the backend or before it reaches your client that acts as the consumer. Or it can be calling out to other services. It could be calling out to AWS Lambda. It could be doing a type of validation on the requests, checking if there's the right type of query parameters or headers or whatever type of metadata that you want to check on before it reaches the backend. For now, we're just going to settle with this IP filtering policy after we have removed those ones for the mock. So let's just go and deploy this new version of our API. I will head back to our developer portal and just try to call this again using this API key. Now, obviously, first we need to do a subscription. So let me come back into my portal here. And again, I'm just going to make sure that I'm signed in here as Alice, which I am. So that's great. So let's go into applications first. I'm going to create a new application. So what is an application? An application is basically an entity that can be the identifier of a consumer of an API. So in the case of a non-anonymous plan, right? So API key or OAuth2, etc. We need to have an application being the identity of the consumer that calls the API. It will also mean that if I'm a developer and I create my application and I subscribe to a few APIs, it's going to allow me to view analytics and raise support tickets, etc., based on my application. So let's go and create a new application. I'm going to call this one third-party travel agent, for example. My application, something like this. I can have an image if I want to. That's going to be fine. Okay, let's say that I'm going to build, web applications. Now, I could either go directly into the API, actually, let's go and do that, or I could find the API here that I want to subscribe to. But as I mentioned, let's skip this and just create our application for now. Okay, so we have this application now, so let me go into the catalog again. Let me go into the list of APIs. I can only see the vacations API, so let's go into that one. And now what I can do is I can go here to the subscribe section. And as we covered, we have two plans. We have the free open for all plan, and we have the protected that gives unlimited access to the API. The free one has the keyless plan, and the protected one has this personal key using a manual validation where someone actually has to approve us. So let's go ahead and set next here. And let's select our application, which is our third-party travel agent. I'm going to say, please approve your partner or something like this. Okay, great. So I'm going to just validate that request, and then I'm going to basically require an approval from the API manager. So let's come back to our console, signed in as admin. We can now see I have this little notification icon up here on the right hand of my screen. It says that I have a new task. So the application third-party agent wants to subscribe to the vacations API using the protected plan. And I can then go in and see the message to why they want to be able to subscribe to this, and I can go and accept it. I can give a start and end date for how long the key will be valid. But for now, I'm just going to say that, that's accepted to infinity effectively. I could renew the API key from here. I could revoke it. But for now, let's go back to Alice into the developer portal. So when I now enter my third-party application here, I can go into subscriptions, and I'll see that my subscription has now been accepted by the manager. So that means that I have my API key. So let's go and try to make a request using Postman in this case to get the vacations available. So let's go and copy this API key. Now let's open Postman. So I'm going to make a new request here. So first, let's put in our header that we just copied right here and just save it for now. And then I'm going to be using the URL here now for our gateway for our vacations API. I'm going to put in right here. Now, let's just add something temporary right here. So let's say test, for example. And let's try to call this. Actually, let's add an ID as well. Let's add ID. No, let's wait with that. Let's just keep it like this. Now, we should here return the JSON here, the response from the actual backend service for the cruise information. So if I make a few calls here, what I expect now is that we should have, here we go, we reached our limit. So now if I add the actual key here for my header, so it's Gravitee, and this is something, of course, that you can customize, Gravitee API key. And then I pass this key here to identify me as a consumer to my application to this API. So now when I make this call, you can see I could make as many calls as I want to, right? Because remember, we didn't have a rate limit on our API key plan. However, if I do /10 here to call the resource for the vacations with ID, if you remember, we added a policy to protect that one to only be accessed for certain IP addresses, right? So in my case, I'm not going to be allowed to do that. Now, what I can do as a third party here, or someone that has an application, is that I can, of course, go and add other people, maybe my colleagues, my developers, as members to my application. So they might also use the API key to call APIs. I might subscribe, obviously, to multiple APIs if I want to. I can also view any type of analytics information, right? So let's have a look for the last 5 minutes. We can see we've made a couple of calls here to vacations and vacations with ID. We can see some of the calls have been successful. Obviously, some of them have not been successful. We can kind of see some nice graphs here. I can view also, where I'm calling this API from. So I'm in Sweden, so we can see that that's where the API calls are coming from. And obviously, a manager could then customize dashboards. And of course, you could see other types of metrics and information available in the API management console. So far, we've covered the API designer and how we can import APIs designed in the API designer to API management. We've looked at how we can expose one of our APIs through a developer portal using multiple types of plans and authentication. We've had a look a bit on how our policies works in terms of IP filtering and rate limiting as some of the examples we've used. The next component I wanted to focus on was the alert engine component. So alert engine is basically a set of alerting capabilities across all of our products. So in the API management product, you can set up alerts for health about your environment. Actually, consumers and application owners can set up alerts for their end user third-party information. So if you have, if you as a user and someone owning an application want to set up an alert in case of the response time taking too long, you can actually do that from the developer portal. And as an administrator and as an API manager, you can set up, as I mentioned, health checks, and you can set up things specifically on an API level, which is what we're going to do in this demonstration. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go into my API console. So here's our vacations API, and I want to set up an alert in case someone calls my API and the response back is a 404. So if someone is trying to access something that doesn't exist, I want to be able to get some type of alert. In my case, I want to subscribe to such alerts using my Slack channel. So how do I do this? Well, I go into alerts here for my API. I'm creating a new API, a new alert. And I'm going to say that I want to call this one resource missing or something like this. I'm going to enable this alert. I'm going to say that this alert is a warning type of alert. Now, as the rule, we have a lot of different types of rules here in order to look for aggregations and thresholds. I'm going to say specifically that I want to alert when a metric hits a specific condition. Specifically, I want it to alert when we have a response code being a 404. I can have a time frame here. Maybe I wanted to say that I only care in the middle of the night when other people are not actively managing the system. But in this case, let's go ahead and say that we want to have these notifications and alerts happening whenever it happens. I can check the response time. I can see the upstream response time from the underlying API. In my case, I'm going to have a look at the status code. So if the status code is between, so we could have had more here, but let's say just 404s is what we care about. Then we can filter on different other elements of the API request. But let's keep that for now. So any calls to our API that returns a 404, we want to have a notification. So a notification, we would first have to set up so dampening is basically allowing us to not get spammed effectively in case something happens very, very frequently. We can have different types of dampening on the notifications. Let's keep the default for now, and I'm going to add a Slack channel here as part of my notification. So I've set up a Slack channel already that's called Alert Engine, and I also have a token that I can use that I've set up on Slack, which is obviously out of scope for this demonstration. Now, for the message here, I can obviously put any free text, but I can also use our expression language to effectively build up a dynamic message based on the information in the request. So I'm going to be a bit lazy here and just copy message that I've prepared. Basically, I'm saying that this name of the API returned and the response code 404 in this case from the user. And here I'm just taking the browser information from the user agent that was in the request. And I'm also taking the country code and the continent. So let's try this. Let's create this alert. There we go. And now what we need to do is obviously we need to go into Postman and we need to make a 404 request. But before we do that, let's open my Slack channel here. So I have a Slack channel here. We have no messages other than for myself, but we also have this Slack bot available here in this channel. So back to Postman. This is where we obviously managed to make our request to vacations. What if we now enter something that doesn't exist? So let's say we try to use trips here in this case. Now, what we expect is we basically get a 404 from the backend service because it's still trying to reach that, but that we cannot get v1 trips. Now, what I expect here, if I just go back to my Slack channel, is I got a message here from the Alert Engine bot saying Vacations API return 404 from user Postman runtime, which is my user agent, in this case, my browser, in Sweden, Europe. So that's just an example of how we can work with alerting. And as I mentioned, we can also set up alerts on suspicious behavior used through the identity platform. For example, too many password resets. We can set up alerts on a platform level. Is your gateway having a specific CPU threshold that you want to monitor, and also third parties and consumers can set up their alerts from a developer portal. So the access management component, we've actually already used it a bit when we signed into the developer portal using our fingerprint. Now, in this use case, what we want to do, obviously we have this vacation API now, and one of our partners might want to create a website, or maybe we want to create a website where users can sign in and maybe view their vacations and their offers, etc. So they need to access the API, and it wouldn't make sense for each of those individual users to create their own application and register in a developer portal. Instead, we want to make it a web-based experience where people just sign in. In our case, we're going to actually let them sign in with their Google account, and then we will basically authenticate the API using this token that we get from the access management component. So the flow of this demonstration will basically be as you see on the screen. So it's going to start with our application. In that case, it's going to be represented by a web page in the browser that is going to authenticate the user through the access management component. So the access management component will have an application registered for that website. It also will have and we're going to set it up, it will have a Google identity provider. So we will actually let users sign in with Google. As I've mentioned, we can have a lot of different types of identity providers, all being federated through the access management component. And if the user is allowed to sign in, we're going to give an access token to the application, i.e. the browser and the website. And then the application and the website will then use that access token when it makes the call to our API, which is our vacation API. And if everything is okay and the token is validated with our access management component and everything looks good, we're then going to forward a call to our backend service, which in our case is obviously our vacation API backend. Now, one other change we need to make here is we need to add a new plan to our vacation API. And actually, we may want to revoke one or two of the plans that we already have, right? We want to maybe move the anonymous one, and maybe we want to move also the API token one and deprecate those plans and only use our new secure OAuth 2 based plan. And this is what our access management console looks like. We're currently looking at the dashboard where we can see different metrics in terms of the number of applications we have, how many users are signing up, signing in to the different applications. So let's start by creating a new application. We can either do that from here. We can go to the application panel here, where I already have a few applications set up. So let's go and create a new application. Let's create a web application because this is effectively going to be the application that is used in our website. For the name here, I'm going to say, let's call this one vacation web app, something like this. I need to give it a redirect URI so that when we sign in, we know what web page to reach when we basically have been signed in successfully and want to redirect back. So this is the web page, the server URL for my web page that we will use as the vacation application. Then for client ID, I need to put in a client ID here that I already have prepared in the website. So the website is already prepared to try to reach an application on the Gravitee Access Management Gateway, and it already has an ID it's using here. So I'm just going to type in Gravitee Travel Client here, and I'm going to let the secret automatically populate. Okay, so now we have our application here. Now, before we try it out, we want to do a few settings first. So one of the things I mentioned is that we're going to sign in with Google. So we have this in our application, we have this concept of our identity providers. So I can go here and I can enable some of the identity providers that have already been configured. So we have Azure and our kind of default and Salesforce. Now the ones that you see here depends on what I have set up here as part of my security domains available identity providers. So let's go and create a new one for Google. So I'm going to go into settings. I'm going to come in here to providers. And here we see those four that I have already created. I'm going to create a new one. So these are some of the identity providers that we support. Some of them obviously have very generic protocols like HTTP and LDAP and JDBC, OpenID Connect, etc. Now, specifically, I want to use this Google one because I want to have Google SSO as part of authenticating users to go and get their vacation information. So let's call it my Google IDP, something like this. And I already created a client ID and client secret in Google. So that's kind of auto scope for this demonstration. Okay, and that's it. So I'm just going to create it like that. Okay, so now if I come back to my vacation web app application right here and I go into my identity providers, I expect to have this new my Google IDP. So let's enable that one. Obviously, you can have multiple ones and allow the user to sign in with multiple types of identity providers. And then we can actually use our design component to do things like we can obviously brand how the authentication and sign in and consent screens look like. We can also create what we call flows, which is very similar to how we do it in the API management components. We can say if you sign in with Google, then actually we're going to call a third-party HTTP service, or we want to enrich your user profile based on certain claims and scopes, etc. For now, let's just focus on our OAuth 2 type settings. So the web application is going to use client credentials to as the grant type. So let's enable that for now. What we also want to do is we may want to have the user's profile being part of the sign-in, so that maybe we can display the profile picture of the user. So the ones we're going to want here is we're going to want the OpenID scope, and we also want to use the profile scope. You can extend scopes and you can add your custom claims, but let's just focus on getting this thing working with our API management component for now. So let's just go and save this. There we go. Okay, so we have this application now. What we can actually do is we can go in here to our overview. We can actually try the login flow already from here. Let's try this in incognito window, just making sure that I haven't signed in. So what you see here on the screen is basically our default branded sign-in flow. And again, you can customize these very easily. And for now, we only have that Google identity provider available to us. So let's go and select that one. It's going to take us, and this is, let's change the language just here quickly to English. All right, so I'm going to enter my Gravitee Google account details here. So I'm just going to sign in with that. I'm going to sign in with my password. And now, hopefully, okay, it's actually asking me for a two-step verification. So let me just quickly go in and enable that. That's what we use here at Gravitee in terms of signing into our system. So just now kind of pass that check using my mobile phone. Okay, great. So now I'm signed in, and the redirect URI now takes me to this browser here. Fantastic. Okay, so let's close that down. So we've now proven that we actually have this working, and now we obviously just want to integrate that with our API management component. So back in the Gravitee API management console, we want to come into our API, the Vacations API. And the first thing we want to do is we want to actually create a resource for our API. So a resource could be for caching, or it could be, in our case, for connecting the access management application to the API. So I'm going to go here into resources, and I'm going to specify this one called the Gravitee IO/IAM authorization server. Now for the resource name, we can call this anything. So let's go and call this one Gravitee AM. And for server URL, I'm going to use my Gravitee AM server URL. This is the latest version of the access management component. This is the name of my security domain that I've created. And now we just need to copy over the client ID and client secret. So the client ID, we know we can just go here and copy it and make that a bit quicker for us. And then the client secret has been automatically generated. We don't really know what it looks like. We don't really have to. And for now, let's be happy with that. And for the plans here, what we can do is we can actually go and deprecate our two previous plans. So we're not going to support any open or actually any API key-based authentication anymore. We're going to have a new plan now. So let's go and create that, and let's call this one, OAuth 2 plan. Very creative. Only to be used with registered applications. Okay, and let's try this auto-validate subscription, which means that anyone that applies to this with an application actually will be automatically validated. We don't have to go as an admin and approve everyone. Let's just do that for now, just kind of to demonstrate how that looks like. Now for authentication type, we've already tried API key and keyless. Now we're going to try the OAuth 2 one. And now for the OAuth 2 resource, we should be able to see our Gravitee AM resource right here. We could enable the extract OAuth 2 payload option. That would mean that in the design of our API, where we use our policies, we could actually, for example, extract the user's profile, username or ID or something like this, and send to our backend vacation API to only extract their vacation offers, for example, from the database. But for now, let's just not do that and just focus on getting the authentication there. We're going to save this as is. We're not going to apply any rate limiting on this plan. So now we only have our new OAuth 2 plan. Let's deploy this API. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create a new application within our API management piece. Now, obviously, there are concepts like dynamic client registration that we support, which allows you to automate the client registration across your access and API application lists. But for now, let's just go and type in a name here. So let's go and do vacation. Let's do vacation web app. It's kindly saved that from last time. And let's just write temporary for description. Then for the type, let's type in web. And for our client ID, we need to have the same client ID as we have in our access management and in our web page application in the browser code. So let's use the Gravitee travel client. Now, last demonstration, we went into the developer portal to subscribe to an API. Now here, let's just go and use the subscription inside the console, which we can also do. So I'm going to subscribe to that. And as we mentioned, we didn't use the approval process this time. It's automatically validating the application. All right, so that should be it, just creating the application. There we go. So now we have this application. It should already be subscribed to our vacations API, so that should be all good. Now, the next thing we want to do is actually try this out. So let's again open an incognito window and go to my web application. So this is just a very, very simple HTML-based application that we have created. We call it the vacation planner, and I should be able to view my vacations here. So when I click the view vacations, what's actually happening is that the browser is sending a call to our vacations API. Now, if I try that, it's going to say unauthorized, right? Because we do not pass a token at this point. And remember, we removed the anonymous plan, so no one should be allowed to use this vacation API. But what we want, of course, is the application here, the browser, to be allowed to call this vacation if a token, a valid token, is applied as well as part of that OAuth 2 plan. Okay, so I'm now going to go and press the sign in button here. It basically takes us to our sign in flow that we kind of previewed before, but now it's fully going to be integrated in our web application, meaning that the user will actually be signed into the application. So let's go and use this my Google IDP here again. And again, I'm going to switch to English here, and I'm going to type in my Gravitee username and my password. And I think this time it's not going to ask me. Well, it will ask me for that two-step verification again. That's great. So let's just open up my mobile application and approve of that. Okay, good. So we've signed in. And now we can see here that we actually signed in as my user. Now this web application actually is not implemented to support the profile picture, but it could be, so we actually do have access to it. But for now, we're just using this username here that we got from Google. Now, if I press view vacations here again, what's going to happen is that we're going to pass the token that the browser now has for that user that signed in using the access management component. And then our API will use the resource to validate the token against the API, sorry, the access management gateway. So let's try to see what happens when we press the view vacations API call again. So there we go. We got the full response here from the backend, right? So what happened again was that the API call was made to our API gateway, and we passed a token, a bearer token that we got from the access management piece. And that was then kind of validated as part of API call from the gateway. And we could have used things like OAuth 2 scopes and different claims to, propagate the request back to the backend service with some user information based on who signed in. But for now, we were happy with this. We managed to add another layer of security on top of our API and remove the API key and the anonymous access and securely rely on OAuth 2 with a Google identity provider providing the user information and the user access. So we've went through most of these components. We went to see how the API designer can be used to use a drag and drop and very easy to use approach to define API, Swagger, and Open API specifications. We've seen how we can import those in API management and protect and kind of control the traffic to our APIs and how we expose them using the API management component. And we've seen how we can get alerts to mediums like Slack. And we've seen now how we can use the access management component to add another layer of security on top of our APIs. The cockpit is a component that basically sits on top of all other components. It's used to provide a single pane of glass for monitoring and controlling our entire Gravitee installation base. So let's go and explore what the cockpit looks like. So this is the cockpit landing page. I have my organization set up here, or my account rather, called Linhack. This is where I have my Gravitee installation and environments. Now the top level kind of entity under an account here is an organization. So here I have OPCO 1 and Group IT. These could be, regional organizations. It could be kind of departments. It's kind of completely up to you how you want to structure and create this hierarchy of assets and relationships. Now, within an organization, you would have one or more environments. So here I have dev and prod, for instance. So it allows me to kind of have a separation of user and assets across my different virtual environments. Now, what you see here is that I have a single installation of my Gravitee API management component. So a single installation, but still allowing multiple environments. This is, again, completely up to you if you want to have a single environment having a one-to-one mapping with a single installation, or as in this case that I've selected here is to have two environments being provided by a single installation. So I can just press the login button here and it's going to take me to my Gravitee API management console, and I can just switch here between dev and prod that I've set up in the cockpit. So adding a new environment here allows me to have an additional environment here as well in my access my Gravitee API management component. So just giving this a refresh here, and what it now tells me is that I have a pending installation for my access management component. So I'm not going to go through the process of installing and register your Gravitee installation with the cockpit, but that's what I've done here. So now I have a pending installation to go and allocate to one of my environments. Let's go and do that. So I'm going to select this access management installation to be part of the Group IT prod environment. So I'm going to accept that. And then what I'll also do is I'll go into my dev environment here under my Group IT organization, and I'm just going to select that for AM. I also want to associate that with my dev environment. So there we go. I should now have linked both of them, and that takes me to ability to sign in using this button right here. So this is my dev environment. I haven't created anything in there. And then the one where we did our work was our prod environment here, where we have our application. So now I have two environments here, easy as that, and I can get a good kind of overview of how it all fits together now here with our dashboard, seeing that our new AM management component has been associated with both our prod and dev environments. So we just go into the Group IT dashboard here of my Group IT organization. I get a clear picture in terms of how the different components are up and running. So it looks like our gateway still hasn't registered as we just installed it, but we have information here, for example, that our APM gateway is up and running. We can go and see more health information about that particular component. And as we covered with Alert Engine is coming soon in terms of integrations. It's probably already there in the release as you watch this video. The idea of Alert Engine within Cockpit is to alert and allow you to subscribe to notifications across kind of organizational events that happens within your environment, such as a node going down, etc. So that's how the cockpit works.